What's up, YouTube? So today I'm talking about the different types of strengths you can have in karate. So first things first is structural strength, and then you want rotational strength, and then you want, like, I would call it having a flexible spine or strength in different angles or on a different plane. Structural strength is all about understanding how your body links together in your anatomy, right? So, or if I were to pick up something heavy, everyone teaches you to keep your back straight, don't bend over and stuff like that. Those are all structural ideas. If I were to say trying to push somebody over, it'll be hard for me to push somebody over with my elbows flared out versus elbows in and pushing here. Because the idea here is that you want to engage larger muscle groups. So that's going to be your back and your lats as you push something. Kind of like when you bench press, you're pushing with that. And notice in that motion, my elbows are down and my shoulders are back. And I'm pushing, right? And that versus trying to push like with your elbows flared out and you're pushing with your upper shoulders. This is all just arm motion versus this uses your entire back. Once you understand how that works with your upper body, you got to be able to sync that with your lower body. And this all relates back to kata, right? And karate. So if I were to push something like this, if I were to push something that has actual weight, I'm going to bounce back myself. But if I were to use my stance, and remember, if I were to keep my hips underneath my center as I push, I'm going to be able to absorb that right into the ground, right? So if you think about your stance and your footwork, the way you do your katas, right? The way you step, it all reinforces your structure so that when energy does come back at you, it's being reabsorbed straight down or straight into the ground. Anytime you're punching or pushing too far forward and you're leaning too far forward, or let's say your head's over your toes, right? Anytime you do that, your center of gravity is off, and that's where you can start slipping. That's where you find yourself on your heels because your hips are not underneath you. That's where you get pushed back, right? You're really just trying to create solid angles that your body can kind of lock into. So some examples of that, if you think about your horse stance or your sumo stance, right? If I get to this and I just sink down. Right now with my stance, I feel like my thighs, my quads are holding myself up, right? That means after some amount of time, a couple minutes, I'm gonna feel a lot of burn in my thighs. And it's really just my muscles that are trying to hold me up. But now if I think about flaring my knees out, nothing changes. If I think about flaring my knees out and sinking my hips into this groove here, then I really feel structurally my hips are locking in place and I can kind of sit here for a while, right? So it's transferring the energy from thinking about holding something up with your muscles and holding something up with your spine and your structure. So that's structural strength. Now you got to think about rotational strength. And then at the end, we're going to combine all this together. So rotational strength is really about turning your body into coils, right? So what I mean by that is as I twist and turn, I'm not just thinking about me facing this way and then I got to turn and face that way and now I got to turn and face this way. Notice how nothing's really connected. So if I did that like traditional looking and I went here to here and I turn and I'm here. There are moments in that sequence there where I am here and my structure opens up and I'm loose. And then I sink into place, I'm loose, and I sink into place, right? And that's why they tell you try not to have your head move up and down, because that's kind of indicative of having loose structure, lock into place, solid structure, loose structure, lock into place, solid structure, right? In reality, what you really want to aim for is to have a solid structure the entire time. So that means every time you're moving, you're actually just think about how a spring or rubber band, when you twist it, it coils up. So every time you're moving, you should think about your coiling and then releasing that coil into your stance. So if I were to do that same thing here, I'm here to there, I go here, I coil, and I release. If I turn around, everything coils in, and I expand into that, right? So there's a lot of expansion, contraction, right? So I'm coiling in and I expand all the way out. I coil in and I expand out, right? So everything's kind of this in and out motion. And you see that in kata as well, where you in that hanshi, where you have that hourglass stance, right? And you're coiling in here before you extend all the way out, right? So all these things kind of come together in kata. So having that rotational power, right? That mindset is about having, you're bottling up all this potential energy, and then bam, it shoots forward. You bottle it up and it shoots forward. Bottle up and it shoots in, right? And it applies to every single movement. Even if you're standing still and you're doing high blocks, right? Every time your hand switches is a chance to coil in, right? So if I did it to the side here and I don't coil and I'm just very expanded here, even if I do it quick, in most dojos that looks okay, right? It looks sharp, it looks powerful, but there's moments of looseness in that. And that moments of looseness is what it tells me that the structure is a little faulty, right? So now if you took this and you think the looseness is actually, as you let go, you coil in and then you spring out, right? So my shoulder is actually coming in. I'm over dramatizing it, but I'm coiling in and I'm shooting out, right? Coil, everything kind of comes in, right? So if I do that full speed, so even as you're just standing still and doing blocks, you're coiling. Even if I do this, so if I do this expanded, so you could tell I have, my arms are not connected to everything else, where everything looks sharp and fast. And you see this a lot in a lot of tournament katas, where everything's kind of sharp, to the point, very linear, snappy, right? But there's no connection to the body in there, because you're missing that point where that block has a potential to just break something, right? Versus just making it look nice and cool and flashy, right? So this is flashy. Even with the hips in there, it's flashy, but there's no power at the end of that, right? Now if I added some coiling to it, right? So I'm really just thinking about in, out. And in addition to that, my hands are always thinking, I'm always thinking with my hands, wherever it ends up, I need to start in the opposite direction. So what I mean by that is, if I do a middle block here and it ends up with my palm facing me, I got to figure out, how do I get the most amount of torque in that? And that means my palm has to face away somewhere, right? So that means my palm, if I'm doing the middle block, my palm here is like twisted to the point where it really just wants to release itself, right? So I'm really twisting everything so it really flings out. Coil, coil, fling, right? Coil, right? So really just torque it this way so that naturally it wants to just unravel itself into that point of impact, right? I go, right? This versus super sharp and flashy, but there's really no impact in it. You could hear it in the bag, right? Same here. So if I threw just a middle block, let's say, or a down block, I haven't done that. If I think about super fast, flashy here, right? Nice and sharp. It's hitting like right at the surface of the bag, right? But the bag's barely moving. Now, if I think about even coiling with one arm, I coil inward here, right? I'm really just thinking my arm's gonna fly through this bag at the moment of impact, because my entire momentum, my entire body weight, my mass is traveling all the way through here like a whip, palm facing this way, palm facing that way now, right? So that works for every single movement in kata. You have your shuto uke, it's the same thing, right? I go here, flashy, right? But not impactful. You can see the bag barely moves. But if I go, even with the same wind up, if I go, right? That's a lot more impactful than this, right? And the only difference is I'm really thinking about bringing in and expanding out. Some good examples that combine those two would be a lot of stance movements or stance shifting while adding an upper body movement. So in Pasa, you have this thing here, right? Anytime you're stance shifting and you're adding upper body movement, that's structural, right? You don't want to be all loose out here. And then it's also rotational strength. So anytime you're stepping, striking, stepping back, striking, right? Stepping forward, striking. So those are all coils into structural strength, right? So now some bonus stuff. Some exercises that help me get my rotational strength down. A lot of things that open up the hip and also kind of develop my spine, more pliability around the spine as well, right? So there's an old saying, you're only as old as your spine is flexible. So the more flexibility you have in your spine, the younger you're gonna feel, right? That's why people love to stretch forward, stretch back to the side, being able to do that. Another exercise I do is about like flicking. So if I think about flicking water off of my hands, right? If you just wash your hands, you're trying to flick water off of your hands. This motion here allows you to be kind of loose and also use your entire body to flick your hand. Kind of like, the analogy where your body's like a metal chain and it all starts from the feet and it all flicks out, right? So you can do all of your blocks and your punches and your kicks in that fashion just to get your body coordinated to be able to add that rotational strength. So it kind of looks silly, but I'm really thinking about, here's my high block and I'm flicking it out. Here's my round block. Here's my middle. Here's my down. Front snap. Side. Both hands, right? One up, one down. And this is like your naihanchi. Being able to have that looseness, it's gonna really help smooth out the transitions when you shift your body weight from your lower stance to the point of impact. So if there's any stopgap in that momentum, it's gonna break the chain and you're gonna lose power at the end. Let's say I'm trying to throw a punch this way and my hips aren't too flexible. So I start the reaction here and I really just stop, right? My hips don't allow me to rotate over, or my knee doesn't allow me to rotate over. That's where most of my momentum is gonna end, and my hands, and the power of my hands aren't gonna be as strong. So if I'm able to add a little bit of torque there, right? And with everything we just mentioned, right? Coiling, looseness, rotational strength, ending on structural strength. Structural, right? So that's gonna help make all your punches, all of your katas look more impactful and be more practical, because you don't want to hit something and have it bounce back at you.